Liquefied natural gas is natural gas that has been converted to liquid form for ease of storage or transport. It takes up about 1/600th the volume of natural gas in the gaseous state. It is odorless, colorless, non-toxic and non-corrosive. Hazards include flammability after vaporization into a gaseous state, freezing and asphyxia. The liquefaction process involves removal of certain components, such as dust, hazard gases, helium, water, and heavy hydrocarbons, which could cause difficulty downstream. The natural gas is then condensed into a liquid at close to atmospheric pressure by cooling it to approximately -162 degrees Celsius. Maximum transport pressure is set at around 25 kilopascals. LNG achieves a higher reduction in volume than compressed natural gas so that the energy density of LNG is 2.4 times greater than that of CNG or 60% that of diesel fuel. This makes LNG cost-efficient to transport over long distances where pipelines do not exist. Specially designed cryogenic sea vessels or cryogenic road tankers are used for its transport. LNG is principally used for transporting natural gas to markets, where it is regasified and distributed as pipeline natural gas. It can be used in natural gas vehicles, although it is more common to design vehicles to use compressed natural gas. Its relatively high cost of production and the need to store it in expensive cryogenic tanks have hindered widespread commercial use. Despite these drawbacks, on energy basis LNG production is expected to hit 10% of the global crude production by 2020. Specific energy content and energy density. The heating value depends on the source of gas that is used and the process that is used to liquefy the gas. The range of heating value can span ±10 to 15%. A typical value of the higher heating value of LNG is approximately 50 megajoules per kilogram at 21,500 BTU/pound. A typical value of the lower heating value of LNG is 45 megajoules per kilogram or 19,350 BTU/pound. For the purpose of comparison of different fuels, the heating value may be expressed in terms of energy per volume, which is known as the energy density expressed in mJ liter. The density of LNG is roughly 0.41 kilograms liter to 0.5 kilograms liter, depending on temperature, pressure, and composition, compared to water at 1.0 kilograms liter. Using the median value of 0.45 kilograms liter, the typical energy density values are 22.5 megajoules liter or 20.3 megajoules liter. The energy density of LNG is approximately 2.4 times greater than that of CNG, which makes it economical to transport natural gas by ship in the form of LNG. The energy density of LNG is comparable to propane and ethanol, but is only 60% that of diesel and 70% that of gasoline. History. Experiments on the properties of gases started early in the 17th century. By the middle of the 17th century, Robert Boyle had derived the inverse relationship between the pressure and the volume of gases. About the same time, Guillaume Montan started looking into temperature effects on gas. Various gas experiments continued for the next 200 years. During that time there were efforts to liquefy gases. Many new facts on the nature of gases had been discovered. For example, early in the 19th century, Canute de la Tour had shown there was a temperature above which a gas could not be liquefied. There was a major push in the mid to late 19th century to liquefy all gases. A number of scientists, including Michael Faraday, James Joule, and William Thomson, did experiments in this area. In 1886, Carroll Bolshevsky liquefied methane, the primary constituent of natural gas. By 1900 all gases had been liquefied except helium, which was liquefied in 1908. The first large-scale liquefaction of natural gas in the U.S. was in 1918 when the U.S. government liquefied natural gas as a way to extract helium, which is a small component of some natural gas. This helium was intended for use in British dirigibles for World War I. The liquid natural gas was not stored, but regasified and immediately put into the gas mains. The key patents having to do with natural gas liquefaction were in 1915 and the mid-1930s. In 1915, Godfrey Cabot patented a method for storing liquid gases at very low temperatures. It consisted of a thermos bottle-type design which included a cold inner tank within an outer tank, the tanks being separated by insulation. In 1937, Lee Twomey received patents for a process for large-scale liquefaction of natural gas. The intention was to store natural gas as a liquid so it could be used for shaving peak energy loads during cold snaps. Because of large volumes, it is not practical to store natural gas as a gas near atmospheric pressure. However, if it can be liquefied, it can be stored in a volume 600 times smaller. This is a practical way to store it, but the gas must be stored at -260 degrees Fahrenheit. There are two processes for liquefying natural gas in large quantities. The first is the cascade process, in which the natural gas is cooled by another gas which in turn has been cooled by still another gas, hence named the cascade process. There are usually two cascade cycles prior to the liquid natural gas cycle. The other method is the Lind process, with a variation of the Lind process, called the Claude process, being sometimes used. In this process, the gas is cooled regeneratively by continually passing it through an orifice until it is cooled to temperatures at which it liquefies. The cooling of gas by expanding it through an orifice was developed by James Joule and William Thomson and is known as the Joule-Thomson effect. Lee Twomey used the cascade process for his patents. Commercial operations in the United States. The East Ohio Gas Company built a full-scale commercial liquid natural gas plant in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1940, just after a successful pilot plant built by its sister company, Hope Natural Gas Company of West Virginia. This was the first such plant in the world. Originally it had 3 spheres, approximately 63 feet in diameter, containing LNG at -260 degrees Fahrenheit. Each sphere held the equivalent of about 50 million cubic feet of natural gas. A fourth tank, a cylinder, was added in 1942. It had an equivalent capacity of 100 million cubic feet of gas. The plant operated successfully for 3 years. The stored gas was regasified and put into the mains when cold snaps hit and extra capacity was needed. This precluded the denial of gas to some customers during a cold snap. The Cleveland plant failed on October 20, 1944 when the cylindrical tank ruptured, spilling thousands of gallons of LNG over the plant and nearby neighborhood. The gas evaporated and caught fire, which caused 130 fatalities. The fire delayed further implementation of LNG facilities for several years. However, over the next 15 years, new research on low-temperature alloys and better insulation materials set the stage for a revival of the industry. It restarted in 1959 when a U.S. World War II Liberty ship, the Methane Pioneer, converted to carry LNG, made a delivery of LNG from the U.S. Gulf Coast to energy-starved Great Britain. In June 1964, the world's first purpose-built LNG carrier, the Methane Princess, entered service. Soon after that, a large natural gas field was discovered in Algeria. International trade in LNG quickly followed, as LNG was shipped to France and Great Britain from the Algerian fields. One more important attribute of LNG had now been exploited. Once natural gas was liquefied, it could not only be stored more easily, but it could be transported. Thus, energy could now be shipped over the oceans via LNG the same way it was shipped by oil. The U.S. LNG industry restarted in 1965 when a series of new plants were built in the U.S. The building continued through the 1970s. These plants were not only used for peak shaving, as in Cleveland, but also for baseload supplies for places that never had natural gas prior to this. A number of import facilities were built on the East Coast in anticipation of the need to import energy via LNG. However, a recent boom in U.S. natural production, enabled by hydraulic fracturing, has many of these import facilities being considered as export facilities. The first U.S. LNG export was completed in early 2016. Production. The natural gas fed into the LNG plant will be treated to remove water, hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide and other components that will freeze under the low temperatures needed for storage or be destructive to the liquefaction facility. LNG typically contains more than 90% methane. It also contains small amounts of ethane, propane, butane, some heavier alkanes, and nitrogen. The purification process can be designed to give almost 100% methane. One of the risks of LNG is a rapid phase transition explosion, which occurs when cold LNG comes into contact with water. The most important infrastructure needed for LNG production and transportation is an LNG plant consisting of one or more LNG trains, each of which is an independent unit for gas liquefaction. The largest LNG train now in operation is in Qatar. These facilities recently reached a safety milestone, completing 12 years of operations on its offshore facilities without a lost time incident. Until recently, it was the Train 4 of Atlantic LNG in Trinidad and Tobago, with a production capacity of 5.2 million metric ton per annum, followed by the SEGAS LNG plant in Egypt with a capacity of 5 mmtpa. In July 2014, Atlantic LNG celebrated its 3,000th cargo of LNG at the company's liquefaction facility in Trinidad. The Qatar Gas 2 plant has a production capacity of 7.8 mmtpa for each of its two trains. LNG sourced from Qatar Gas 2 will be supplied to Kuwait, following the signing of an agreement in May 2014 between Qatar Liquefied Gas Company and Kuwait Petroleum Corp. LNG is loaded onto ships and delivered to a regasification terminal, where the LNG is allowed to expand and reconvert into gas. Regasification terminals are usually connected to a storage and pipeline distribution network to distribute natural gas to local distribution companies or independent power plants. LNG plant production information for the following table is derived in part from publication by the U.S. Energy Information Administration. See also List of LNG terminals. World total production. The LNG industry developed slowly during the second half of the last century because most LNG plants are located in remote areas not served by pipelines, and because of the large costs to treat and transport LNG. Constructing an LNG plant costs at least $1.5 billion per 1 mmtpa capacity. A receiving terminal costs $1 billion per 1 BCF per day throughput capacity, and LNG vessels cost $200 million, $300 million. In the early 2000s, prices for constructing LNG plants, receiving terminals and vessels fell as new technologies emerged converged and more players invested in liquefaction and regasification. This tended to make LNG more competitive as a means of energy distribution, but increasing material costs and demand for construction contractors have put upward pressure on prices in the last few years. The standard price for a 125,000 cubic meter LNG vessel built in European and Japanese shipyards used to be $250 million. When Korean and Chinese shipyards entered the race, increased competition reduced profit margins and improved efficiency, reducing costs by 60%. Costs in US dollars also declined due to the devaluation of the currencies of the world's largest shipbuilders, the Japanese yen and Korean won. Since 2004, the large number of orders increased demand for shipyard slots, raising the price and increasing ship costs. The per-ton construction cost of an LNG liquefaction plant fell steadily from the 1970s through the 1990s. The cost reduced by approximately 35%. However, recently the cost of building liquefaction and regasification terminals doubled due to increased cost of materials and a shortage of skilled labor, professional engineers, designers, managers and other white-collar professionals. Due to natural gas shortage concerns in the northeastern U.S. and surplus nature gas in the rest of the country, many new LNG import and export terminals have been contemplated in the United States. Concerns about the safety of such facilities create controversy in some regions where they're proposed. One such location is in the Long Island Sound between Connecticut and Long Island. Broadwater Energy, an EFT of TransCanada Corp. and Shell, wishes to build an LNG import terminal in the Sound on the New York side. Local politicians, including the Suffolk County executive, raised questions about the terminal. In 2005, New York Senators Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton also announced their opposition to the project. Several import terminal proposals along the coast of Maine were also met with high levels of resistance and questions. On September 13, 2013, the U.S. Department of Energy approved Dominion Cove Point's application to export up to 770 million cubic feet per day of LNG to countries that do not have a free trade agreement with the U.S. In May 2014, the FERC concluded its environmental assessment of the Cove Point LNG project, which found that the proposed natural gas export project could be built and operated safely. Another LNG terminal is currently proposed for Elba Island, GA. Plans for 3 LNG export terminals in the U.S. Gulf Coast region have also received conditional federal approval. In Canada, an LNG export terminal is under construction near Guysborough, Nova Scotia. Commercial aspects. Global trade in the commercial development of an LNG value chain. LNG suppliers first confirm sales to the downstream buyers and then sign long-term contracts with strict terms and structures for gas pricing. Only when the customers are confirmed and the development of a greenfield project deemed economically feasible, could the sponsors of an LNG project invest in the development and operation. Thus, the LNG liquefaction business has been limited to players with strong financial and political resources. Major international oil companies such as ExxonMobil, Royal Dutch Shell, BP, BG Group, Chevron, and national oil companies such as Pertamina and Petronas are active players. LNG is shipped around the world in specially constructed seagoing vessels. The trade of LNG is completed by signing an SPA between a supply and receiving terminal, and by signing a GSA between a receiving terminal and end users. Most of the contract terms used a BDES or ex-ship, holding the seller responsible for the transport of the gas, with low shipbuilding costs, and the buyers preferring to ensure reliable and stable supply. However, contracts with FOB terms increased. Under such terms, the buyer, who often owns a vessel, assigns a long-term charter agreement with independent carriers, is responsible for the transport. LNG purchasing agreements used to be for a long term with relatively little flexibility both in price and volume. If the annual contract quantity is confirmed, the buyer is obliged to take and pay for the product, or pay for it even if not taken, in what is referred to as the obligation of take-or-pay contract. In the mid-1990s, LNG was a buyer's market. At the request of buyers, the SPAs began to adopt some flexibilities on volume and price. The buyers had more upward and downward flexibilities in top and short-term SPAs. Less than 16 years came into effect. At the same time, alternative destinations for cargo and arbitrage were also allowed. By the turn of the 21st century, the market was again in favor of sellers. However, sellers have become more sophisticated and are now proposing sharing of arbitrage opportunities and moving away from S-curve pricing. There has been much discussion regarding the creation of an OGEC as a natural gas equivalent of OPEC. Russia and Qatar, countries with the largest and the third largest natural gas reserves in the world, have finally supported such move. Until 2003, LNG prices have closely followed oil prices. Since then, LNG prices in Europe and Japan have been lower than oil prices, although the link between LNG and oil is still strong. In contrast, prices in the US and the UK have recently skyrocketed, then fallen as a result of changes in supply and storage. In late 1990s and in early 2000s, the market shifted for buyers, but since 2003 and 2004, it has been a strong seller's market, with netback as the best estimation for prices. Research from QNB Group in 2014 shows that robust global demand is likely to keep LNG prices high for at least the next few years. The current surge in unconventional oil and gas in the US has resulted in lower gas prices in the US. This has led to discussions in Asia oil-linked gas markets to import gas based on Henry Hub Index. Recent high-level conference in Vancouver, the Pacific Energy Summit 2013. Pacific Energy Summit 2013 convened policymakers and experts from Asia and the US to discuss LNG trade relations between these regions. Receiving terminals exist in about 18 countries, including India, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, Greece, Belgium, Spain, Italy, France, the UK, the US, Chile, and the Dominican Republic, among others. Plans exist for Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Canada, Ukraine, and others to also construct new receiving terminals. LNG project screening. Baseload LNG projects require natural gas reserves, buyers and financing. Using proven technology and a proven contractor is extremely important for both investors and buyers. Gas reserves required. 1 TCF of gas required per MTPA of LNG over 20 years. Use of LNG to fuel large over-the-road trucks. LNG is in the early stages of becoming a mainstream fuel for transportation needs. It is being evaluated and tested for over-the-road trucking, off-road, marine, and train applications. There are known problems with the fuel tanks and delivery of gas to the engine, but despite these concerns, the move to LNG as a transportation fuel has begun. China has been a leader in the use of LNG vehicles with over 100,000 LNG-powered vehicles on the road as of September 2014. In the United States, the beginnings of a public LNG fueling capability is being put in place. An alternative fueling center tracking site shows 69 public truck LNG fuel centers as of February 2015. The 2013 National Truckers Directory lists approximately 7,000 truck stops. Thus, approximately 1% of U.S. truck stops have LNG available. As of December 2014, LNG fuel and NGVs have not been taken to very quickly within Europe, and it is questionable whether LNG will ever become the fuel of choice among fleet operators. During the year 2015, Netherlands introduced LNG-powered trucks in transport sector. Australian government is planning to develop an LNG highway to utilize the locally produced LNG and replace the imported diesel fuel used by interstate haulage vehicles. In the year 2015, India also made small beginning by transporting LNG by LNG-powered road tankers in Kerala state. Japan, the world's largest importer of LNG, is set to use of LNG as road transport fuel. Use of LNG to fuel high-horsepower, high-torque engines. In internal combustion engines, the volume of the cylinders is a common measure of the power of an engine. Thus, a 2000 cc engine would typically be more powerful than a 1800 cc engine, but that assumes a similar air-fuel mixture is used. If Vera turbocharger as an example, the 1800 cc engine were using an air-fuel mixture that was significantly more energy-dense, then it might be able to produce more power than a 2000 cc engine burning a less energy-dense air-fuel mixture. Unfortunately, turbochargers are both complex and expensive. Thus, it becomes clear for high-horsepower, high-torque engines a fuel that can inherently be used to create a more energy-dense air-fuel mixture is preferred because a smaller and simpler engine can be used to produce the same power. With traditional gasoline and diesel engines, the energy density of the air-fuel mixture is limited because the liquid fuels do not mix well in the cylinder. Further, gasoline and diesel auto-ignite at temperatures and pressures relevant to engine design. An important part of traditional engine design is designing the cylinders, compression ratios, and fuel injectors such that pre-ignition is avoided, but at the same time as much fuel as possible can be injected, become well mixed, and still have time to complete the combustion process during the power stroke. Natural gas does not auto-ignite at pressures and temperatures relevant to traditional gasoline and diesel engine design, thus providing more flexibility in the design of a natural gas engine. Methane, the main component of natural gas, has an auto-ignition temperature of 580 C, 1076 F, whereas gasoline and diesel auto-ignite at approximately 250 C and 210 C respectively. With a compressed natural gas engine, the mixing of the fuel and the air is more effective since gases typically mix well in a short period of time. But at typical CNG compression pressures, the fuel itself is less energy-dense than gas or diesel, thus the end result is a lower energy-dense air-fuel mixture. Thus, from the same cylinder displacement engine, a non-turbocharged CNG-powered engine is typically less powerful than a similarly sized gas or diesel engine. For that reason, turbochargers are popular on European CNG cars. Despite that limitation, the 12-litre Cummins Westport ISX-12G engine is an example of a CNG-capable engine designed to pull tractor-trailer loads up to 80,000 pounds, showing CNG can be used in most if not all on-road truck applications. The original ISX-G engines incorporated a turbocharger to enhance the air-fuel energy energy density. LNG offers a unique advantage over CNG for more demanding high-horsepower applications by eliminating the need for a turbocharger. Because LNG boils at approximately 160 C, by using a simple heat exchanger, a small amount of LNG can be converted to its gaseous form at extremely high pressure with the use of little or no mechanical energy. A properly designed high-horsepower engine can leverage this extremely high-pressure energy-dense gaseous fuel source to create a higher energy-density air-fuel mixture than can be efficiently created with a CNG-powered engine. The end result when compared to CNG engines is more overall efficiency in high-horsepower engine applications when high-pressure direct injection technology is used. The Westport HDMI-2 fuel system is an example of a high-pressure direct injection technology that does not require a turbocharger if deemed with appropriate LNG heat exchanger technology. The Volvo Trucks 13-liter LNG engine is another example of a LNG engine leveraging advanced high-pressure technology. Westport recommends CNG for engines 7 liters or smaller and LNG with direct injection for engines between 20 and 150 liters. For engines between 7 and 20 liters, either option is recommended. See slide 13 from their NGV Brussels Industry Innovation Session presentation. Container shipping company Maersk Group has decided to introduce LNG fuel-driven container ships. DEME Group has contracted Wärtsilä to power its new generation Antigone class dredger with dual-fuel engines. High-horsepower engines in the oil drilling, mining, locomotive, and marine fields have been or are being developed. Paul Blomers has written a paper concluding as much as 40 million tons per annum of LNG could be required just to meet the global needs of the high-horsepower engines by 2025 to 2030. As of the end of first quarter 2015, Prometheus Energy Group Inc. claims to have delivered over 100 million gallons of LNG within the previous 4 years into the industrial market, and is continuing to add new customers.